People do not retire broke just because they did not earn enough. A lot of the damage comes from financial decisions that sit untouched for years. Here is how expensive that can get. $10,000 earning 0.01% makes about $1 in a year. That same $10,000 earning 4% makes about $400 before taxes. Same money, roughly $399 apart. And nobody had to spend $1 for that gap to happen. Something sits right in front of people who are genuinely responsible with money and they miss it anyway. Quick gut check. When did you last intentionally change something inside one of your financial accounts? A month ago? A year ago? Years or never. Over 15 years working inside retirement accounts, I kept seeing the same mistake happen. Not once, not twice. I saw 5 versions of it. And the last one can convince you that a perfectly good 30-year plan has failed. But the first one? I lived that one myself in 2008, and it cost me years. It was October 2008. Markets were falling, balances were falling, and I moved money out. I told myself I was being cautious. I told myself I could get back in when things settled down. I dressed fear in a suit and called it professional judgment. Getting out was easy. Getting back in was harder. There is no announcement telling you fear is over. There is no bell telling you the bottom happened. The account that stayed invested recovered much faster than mine did. Mine took years longer. And after working through more market drops, I started recognizing the same trigger in other people. They often did not call because their financial plan changed. They called because a feeling changed. That distinction matters. If your income, goals, timeline, family, health, or financial situation changes, review the plan. But if the only thing that changed is how scared you feel after watching the market fall, you may not be making a new plan. You may just be trying to make the feelings stop. And some of the people making those emotional decisions were extremely disciplined savers, which leads to a mistake that surprised me even more. Sometimes your best account can hide your biggest financial weakness. I once spoke with a man who had roughly $200,000 saved for retirement. That takes years of discipline. Then we looked at the money he could actually reach if life went sideways tomorrow. His emergency savings had been sitting at 0.01%. Same person, same financial life. One account had received years of attention. The other had basically been abandoned. That changed how I thought about being good with money. You can be disciplined in one account and absent in another. You can build the number everybody tells you to build and still ignore the number that matters this week. A broken transmission does not care how responsible your retirement balance looks. Neither does a job loss. The successful retirement account made the entire financial picture feel successful. I call that one account blindness. You see proof you are doing one thing right, so you stop checking whether everything else still makes sense. But paying more attention does not automatically solve the problem. Sometimes attention creates another one, and the transaction data showed us something people almost never admit they do. A fund would have a strong quarter. Then 60 to 90 days later, we would see 20 to 30% spikes in fund transfer requests. Not before the strong performance. After people could already see the winner. That timing matters. Once something has already gone up, it feels safer, it feels proven. So people move toward the thing that just performed well. And often, the fund they left had not done anything fundamentally wrong. It had simply stopped being interesting. Panic says I need to get away from pain. Performance chasing says I need to get closer to proof. Different emotion, same mistake. Recent information starts rewriting a long-term decision. If you only want an investment after it proves it can win, you may be buying the proof after somebody else already got the result. Then something else starts winning. Now what? Chase again? That is how somebody can be extremely active with money and still go nowhere. Activity feels like control. It is not always progress. And the next mistake is the opposite. Instead of changing too much, you can quietly leave one number untouched for 10 years. Across 15 years working inside a retirement plan platform, I never saw a service call in the log from somebody saying, I want to increase my contribution by $100 a paycheck. People called to borrow against their accounts. They called when markets fell. They called about withdrawals, rollovers, beneficiaries, and paperwork. But voluntarily calling because somebody decided to save another $100? That was not what filled the phone lines. Your income changes, your life changes, your goals change, and somehow that contribution percentage stays frozen. That is what makes this mistake dangerous. There is no warning light. The account still grows, everything looks fine, but fine can hide a decision that became obsolete years ago. Imagine two people earning similar incomes. One increases the amount going into retirement after every raise. The other leaves the contribution where it was. Nothing dramatic happens tomorrow. But repeat that difference for decades and they are no longer living the same financial life. One number changed early enough can send two similar people in completely different directions. But the fifth pattern is the one I would worry about most, because this one can turn temporary pain into a permanent financial mistake. It is now March 2020. The calls came fast. The question was usually some version of, should I get out before this gets worse? When a balance falls that quickly, it does not feel like temporary information. It feels like the market told you something permanent about your future. That is the trap. A crash gives you information about today's price. It does not automatically give you new information about your 30-year goal. 30 bad days start becoming evidence against 30 years of planning. The allocation was wrong. The the strategy was wrong, maybe investing itself was wrong, one temporary event becomes a permanent conclusion. So during a major financial shock, I would ask a different question. What changed about my actual life? Did the goal change? Did the timeline change? Did the income change? Did the need for this money change? If the answer is no, the market may have changed without your plan needing to change with it. 5 behaviors. 1 cause. And once I show you what all 5 have in common, you will find at least one of them already in your own accounts. The accounts that struggled were not always connected to people with low incomes. They were not always connected to bad investments. And they were definitely not always connected to people who lacked discipline. The pattern underneath all 5 was this. At some point, the default started making decisions instead of the person. The portfolio changed when fear got loud. One account got attention, while another disappeared in the background. Money moved after somebody else had already won. A contribution stayed where somebody set it years ago. A long-term plan changed because the short-term market became painful. Deciding versus defaulting. That is the real difference. A default is not neutral. It is a decision made by an older version of you that you never revisited. That person may have earned less, needed different things, had different goals, but that person can still be running your accounts today, unless you interrupt them. And you can find out whether that is happening in about 2 minutes. Do not rebuild your entire financial life tonight. Pick one number, your retirement contribution, your automatic savings transfer, the rate your cash is earning, a debt payment, a beneficiary you have not checked, one number. Then do 3 things. Look, decide, change. First, look at the actual number, not what you think it is. Open the account and look. Second, decide whether that number still makes sense for the person you are today. Your income today, your responsibilities today, your goals today. Third, if it no longer makes sense, change it before you close the tab. Not next month, not after another finance video, right then. And if the number still makes sense, leave it alone deliberately. That counts too, because the goal is not more activity. The goal is making sure somebody is still running the account. Then attach your next review to something that already happens. A raise, a birthday. January 1st, open enrollment, a job change. Something that forces the question, does the decision I made before still make sense now? That is the system. Not constantly touching your money, not obsessing over markets, just refusing to let an accidental default run for years without being questioned. None of the people who let a default run for years were stupid. Most were not reckless. A lot of them were doing many things right. That is exactly why the mistakes lasted. Nothing looked obviously broken. So go back to the question from the beginning. When did you last intentionally change something inside one of your financial accounts? If the answer was years, never, or you honestly cannot remember, you do not need to fix 5 things tonight. You need one deliberate decision. Look, decide, change. Then let the right decision work. Because 2 people can earn similar money, start in similar places, and look almost identical today. One number changed early enough can send 2 similar people in completely different directions. And there is one pattern I deliberately left off this list because it does not happen inside an account at all. It happens before the account ever gets touched in what you believe about money, before you ever have any. The dangerous part is that most people think they are protecting themselves when they do it. By the time they recognize the cost, years are already gone. Well, that's all for me. Subscribe to Max Stats Finance if you want no BS money guidance based on what actually happened inside real financial accounts, not guru hype and empty motivation. I will see you inside. Later.